We're talking about energy use. Just remember yesterday I talked about the fact that we had a research study that came out of Cologne, Germany, that pointed out that because of the intense amount of energy that is required to create lithium batteries for electric cars, and because of their very short life, and also because you have to fuel the electric vehicles from an external combustion engine. That's right. Electricity, it just doesn't come out of the thin air. It's got to be generated somewhere. But that's okay as long as you don't see the emissions coming out of the tailpipe. It's okay if it comes out of the coal or gas plant, which is really the only practical way that we have of powering the grid right now. And it is a grid that they're talking about. Yes, you can use electric power to get off the grid and to power your own home. Of course, you've got to solve that battery issue yourself at a local level. But the storage issue becomes a big deal on the grid, and there is no effective way to do that with renewables. He's going to find out about that, de Blasio will, in the next 5 years. But we've had another electric car spontaneously catch fire in China, even though, diesel is cleaner than electric vehicles over the life. They last a very long time. They don't take as much energy to produce, and they're cleaner over the lifetime. The other thing is diesel fuel doesn't burn. You can drop a match into a can of diesel and it'll put it out, unlike gasoline. But of course, these electric cars have got yet another one spontaneously catching fire in China. Let's take a look at the Trump counterattack that appears to be taking shape. President Trump is not being pushed around anymore in these personal attacks. And hopefully, as some have suggested, some of the patterns of action that he might do might actually come against some of these institutions and not just individuals. But he has now gone on the defense after being very passive and staying back, so they couldn't accuse him of any kind of obstruction. He did not obstruct anything. As you heard last week, Attorney General Barr said it was within his right to oppose this stuff, but he didn't do that. And so we find that there was no obstruction. And certainly the Mueller was very clear that there was no collusion. And we've got Elizabeth Warren not admitting to that. She says, well, I read this thing on the airplane, 400 pages on the airplane. Well, she must have read it pretty quickly, a kind of, speed reading class, because she missed a lot of the details. If she really thinks that a few tweets by some organization, whether or not it was affiliated with the Russian government, could change the election when the entire structure of these social media companies was set against conservatives and against President Trump. Seriously? You seriously believe you want us to believe that that's the case? Absolute nonsense. And again, I think it's very telltale that in this Mueller report, he refers to the Russian intelligence by its old Cold War Soviet name, because that's what they want. They want to remake Russia into the Cold War Soviet enemy. And they are making them into an enemy. They really escalated this. The question is, are they going to be able to do this all the way into a hot war, which is what I think they really want to do. Bob Woodward, who was part of the Watergate investigation, and he is revered in the press, and he has now come out in an interview with Fox News' Chris Wallace, saying that the dossier has got a lot of garbage in it. Who knew? We've only been saying this for the last 2 years, talking about what garbage it was, what a red herring it was, that the Democrats at the DNC convention, when I was there interviewing people at the convention, and they kept saying, it's Russia, Russia, Russia. And it's like, well, yeah, but what about what Hillary Clinton did? Oh, no, don't look at that. Look at, it was Russia, Russia, Russia behind this. And so, well, I'm not sure that I believe that. That hasn't been proven. That's an assertion made by Hillary Clinton. So we don't look at what was revealed about Hillary Clinton. But now Woodward is saying, what I found out recently, he just found this out. This ace reporter, Bob Woodward, just figured out that Russiagate is a bunch of nonsense, that the dossier is a bunch of nonsense. And they always use this, like, oh, it's the dossier. Remember, I played the clip for you again yesterday. James Clapper, when he was asked by Ron Wyden, are you, he says, I don't know what you're talking about with dossier. In other words, cut the BS. Quit trying to protect yourself by couching this in dossier language. Did you or did you not spy on the American people? Oh, well, Senator, no, not intentionally. No, sir. Well, he was lying about that. And he was using this idea of a dossier to try to dodge all of that. But Bob Woodward has just figured this out recently. What I found out recently, which was really quite surprising, the dossier, which really has a lot of garbage in it, and Mueller found that to be the case. Early in the building of the intelligence community assessment on Russian interference, in an early draft, they actually put the dossier on page 2 in a kind of breakout box. Oh, gee. So Bob Woodward, now again, he's got all these, he's speaking contemporaneously, right? So he's got a lot of parenthetical things there. It makes it a little bit hard to follow, but let's understand that Bob Woodward didn't know that the dossier had a lot of garbage in it. He didn't know that it was the centerpiece in trying to build this idea of Russian interference. Maybe Bob Woodward should now explain this to Elizabeth Warren, because she still doesn't understand that, or claims to not understand that. Still claims that President Trump openly said that he wanted Russia to help him. Hey, Russia, if you got that information about Hillary, let us know. That was a joke. Of course, they can't take jokes. Elizabeth Warren is probably the most straight-laced, humorless schoolmarm that the Democrats could put up for office. And of course, she has no sense of humor or satire. But nevertheless, what he figured out was that the dossier is just a bunch of garbage. He found out that they used it and put it front and center to try to get an assessment of Russian interference. Now, we've been saying this for years. Maybe Bob Woodward doesn't listen to InfoWars. He should. We could tell him what's going to be coming out and what's going to be news a couple of years from now if he would listen to us, but he won't. And I think there's more to this than just his sudden realization and being quite surprised at all this. I think that this thing has sunk so far and has exposed CNN and MSNBC and the collusion of the mainstream media with the deep state, with the bureaucracy, with the intelligence agencies. It has exposed that to such a degree that Bob Woodward now needs to distance himself from all of this stuff. It's so obvious that he isn't going down with this ship. And so now he's got to say, I just found this out recently. I just realized, as the Mueller report came out, I just realized that Elizabeth Warren and CNN and MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and all these people, they've been lying about this stuff all the time. And so has the FBI and the CIA. He says, I think the CIA is pushing this. Real intelligence experts looked at this and said, no, this is not intelligence. This is garbage. And they took it out, said Woodward. But in the process, the idea that they would include something like that in one of the great stellar intelligence assessments, as Mueller also found out, is highly questionable. It needs to be investigated. Well, it was not a great stellar intelligence assessment, Bob. The 17 agencies that said, oh yeah, there's Russian collusion. That was first said by Hillary Clinton in a debate. Then it was parroted by James Clapper later on. And then when he was called on it, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we reported this. Bob, you might pay attention. You're supposed to be an ace reporter. You might pay attention to this type of stuff. When he was actually called on this, James Clapper said, well, no, it actually wasn't 17 intelligence agencies. I got together with one person from the FBI, the NSA, and the CIA. They met with me. They sent their representatives over to James Clapper, who was director of national intelligence, and he basically told them what he believed, and these bureaucratic sycophants agreed. And they said, yeah, all 17 agencies. What a load of garbage. Now, President Trump, as I said, is going on offense. And he is finally going on offense against John Kerry, because this is now the second time that John Kerry is conducting his own private negotiations with Iran. Remember, John Kerry and Barack Obama decided that they would self-ratify a treaty with Iran. And the Republicans said, well, if we have a Republican president, that's probably going to go away, because that isn't a treaty. That is an executive order that you two have signed. And then when President Trump did get rid of it, you had John Kerry go in 2018. He met with the Iranian foreign minister, Javed Zarif, 3 or 4 times to discuss this Iranian deal that was secured by Obama as he put a plane load of foreign currency on there to pay these people off, get kidnappers out. What? I mean, there is so much to investigate out of the Obama administration, but they're not doing it yet. But President Trump is saying Iran is being given very bad advice by John Kerry and people who helped him lead the U.S. into the very bad Iran nuclear deal. What Secretary Kerry has done is unseemly and unprecedented, said Mike Pompeo. This is a former Secretary of State engaged with the largest state sponsor of terror. But here's the important thing, and we'll talk about this when we come back. President Trump said, in a question mark, big violation of the Logan Act? Oh, yes, I think it is. And it's high time somebody pointed that out. I'm glad President Trump did. We've talked about this at Bilderberg many, many times. We'll tell you what the Logan Act is and why he violated it when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're going to talk about President Trump going on offense, not only questioning whether or not John Kerry has now for a second time violated the Logan Act, but he has also filed suit against Elijah Cummings. I just played earlier in the program the House Oversight and Reform Chairman, Elijah Cummings, saying, well, I think we ought to take a look at impeachment. And we don't have anything yet, but we're going to keep looking. And President Trump has filed suit as they're digging through his personal finances and says, you don't have any authority to conduct investigations. That's one of the things that Attorney General Barr said during his presentation before he released the Mueller report. He said, no, Mueller did not leave this open for Congress to decide whether or not there had been obstruction. He was very clear that there was no collusion. He left it open. He presented all the evidence and just left that there. So Barr said, I, as Attorney General, and the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, looked at this and said, no, there is no effort to obstruct this. President Trump had many things that he could have done that he didn't even do to defend himself. And so there is no obstruction, real or intended, in any of these actions. And this was not left open for Congress to do an investigation, decide this, because that's not their role. The Department of Justice conducts investigations. And so that's what President Trump filed. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Before we do, real quickly, I want to remind you of a couple of new sales that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. And, of course, that is the way this program and everything we do here at InfoWars is funded. It's with direct sales to you, our sponsors. And, of course, we have many sponsors for our radio and television programs on the local channels, and we really want you to support those sponsors and tell them why you are supporting them, because you want to keep these programs on air. But we also have direct even those are free to air on our side, and so we still have to pay for things on our side, and so we do that through the products that we sell at InfoWarsStore.com. We've got a couple of sales right now that we've added, new sales. We've got one of Super Male Vitality and Alpha Power together, 50% off. We also have a sale on Brain Force Plus, 25% off. Plus, if you buy it, you can get Knockout for free. So Brain Force Plus, and as I've said before, I would have named it, if I'd tried it and somebody had asked me what to name this, I would have called it Brain Focus, because it really does, as a nutraceutical, help you to focus your thoughts and your recall. Also, the fan favorite Knockout is an all-natural sleep aid, and you can get that for free. You can get Brain Force 25% off, and when you buy that, you can get Knockout for free. And finally, we still have our annual apparel sale. You can get 50% off all shirts, hats, and hoodies with new and classic designs at InfoWarsStore.com. A great conversation starter, one way or the other. No, you can find like-minded people, and you can find people who absolutely hate you. But that can also be a very interesting conversation starter as well. Maybe they will find out that you are not the monster that they predetermine you to be. Take a look at InfoWarsStore.com. And also, don't forget our new YouTube channel. You can find that on YouTube, Libertarian, just like my Twitter account, Libertarian. You can find both of those. Okay, let's take a look at what President Trump is doing. Again, he says, is this a big violation of the Logan Act for John Kerry to meet with the Iranians? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah, both the Paris Climate Accord and the Iranian treaty were self-ratified by the Obama administration, by Obama and by John Kerry. They signed it. That's not the way the Constitution operates. They don't care. Quite frankly, DACA is another one of those cases as well. That was also an executive order, and President Trump has it within his power to stop the deferred action on enforcing our border. You know, we had the Homeland Security Secretary, Janet Napolitano of Obama, say, well, I'm not going to enforce the law, even though I took an oath to the Constitution to uphold the Constitution and to enforce the laws. I'm not going to do that for immigration. And that's been the case now since we've had John Kelly and his handpicked successor, Nielsen, running Homeland Security. They have continued to avoid enforcing the law. President Trump has not stopped that. He could very easily. But he did stop the Iranian treaty. And as a result, in 2018, John Kerry met with the Iranian foreign minister 3 or 4 times, he said. And so President Trump is questioning this again as John Kerry is doing that yet again. Where did the Logan Act come from? Well, the Logan Act goes back to 1798. You had a guy who was actually still in elected office. He was a state legislator out of Pennsylvania. He was a Quaker, a pacifist. And he was concerned that the John Adams administration was moving us towards war with France. And so he went on the side of the British. So he went to France, and he told the people in France that he was there in a private capacity. He offered them advice on how to try to avoid war. He said, there's a lot of people who feel like I do, who don't want to go to war on the side of the British. And so he offered them advice. The Adams administration was furious. They passed the Logan Act, which made it a felony for somebody who is not in the official capacity of crafting foreign policy to do it. And that would include somebody who is no longer the Secretary of State. And so private citizens are not allowed to conduct foreign policy. And we have talked about this many, many times. We've talked about that here at InfoWars in terms of Bilderberg. Bilderberg is a clear violation of the Logan Act. They go there. It's not just a friendly meet and greet. No, they keep everybody out. It's not like Davos where they get together and they have all the press come around. They invite people to come in and they talk about what they're doing. No, and Bilderberg is very, very secretive. They meet in secret. All of the mainstream media doesn't seem to be interested in it because they've got the people who own the Washington Post and the New York Times and so forth. They're frequently in there in the meetings as they talk about policy, as they craft together policy that creates the euro that was first proposed at a Bilderberg meeting back. It's the first or second meeting that they had back in the mid-1950s. And as we were covering it in 2014 in Copenhagen, one of the top-ranking officials of the Labor Party showed up on a side gate. My wife got video of him coming in. He didn't have his badge with him. And so they started asking him for his credentials to get in at that side gate. And he started fumbling around and said, oh, I must have it in my bag. He opens his bag and Ed Balls clumsily dumps out all the contents of his suitcase that he's carrying in. And you can see that it's not shirts and ties or underwear or shampoo. It was filled with documents. But of course, they're all protected under Chatham rules. Well, we've got our own rules. It's called the Logan Act. And it's about time we start to make charges against people for this. We had 2 people that were indicted, one in 1802, another in 1854. There were no convictions on that. But it's about time that John Kerry and people like that who are conducting their own foreign policy in opposition to our elected leaders answer for that. Trump has also sued Elijah Cummings yesterday morning in D.C. District Court. Cummings authorized subpoenas for the president's longtime accountant, along with a few Trump entities. They are fishing. They're on a financial fishing expedition, trying to find some kind of a process crime, something, anywhere. They can come after President Trump. They're desperate after this phony Russiagate thing has collapsed so badly that even Bob Woodward is saying this is ridiculous. Anyway, President Trump in the complaint says Article 1 of the Constitution does not contain an investigations clause. Article 1 of the Constitution does not contain an oversight clause. It gives Congress the power to enact legislation. Accordingly, investigations are legitimate only insofar as they further some legitimate legislative purpose, says the complaint. And Jay Sekulow, who's one of the president's personal attorneys, said in a statement, "We will not allow congressional presidential harassment to go unanswered." Good. He's finally pushing back on this. Matt Gaetz has said that there is going to be evidence of FBI media corruption that will be coming out before the Department of Justice Inspector General report. We know that they have been colluding. And Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch has said that President Trump should file a criminal complaint with the Department of Justice over illicit targeting. At a very minimum, that's what he should do. There has to be reform of these institutions. I know that the reform is not going to be proposed by Congress. They're not concerned whatsoever about the abuse of power within the Department of Justice. They're not concerned about the abuse of power within the CIA or the NSA or the FBI. They're not concerned that these organizations colluded with foreign intelligence agencies. They're not concerned about any of that stuff. President Trump needs to be concerned about more than some individuals. It needs to come after the entire department. As Easter was happening, we had Mark Ruffalo put out his message. Never forget that Jesus was an illegal immigrant. That's his takeaway. That's what he thinks Jesus was about. And I look at this, and he's referring to a Guardian article, something that was written by a guy who actually calls himself a reverend, William Barber, who said in the article, Christians were first called, the followers of Christ were first called Christian at Antioch, because he said there was no other name for the beloved community of former enemies that emerged among people who insisted that a crucified criminal, not Caesar, is Lord. Well, I don't know. I didn't read the whole Guardian article. I don't have time for fiction. So I don't know exactly if that was the point that he was trying to make. I know there were a lot of people on Palm Sunday who thought that Jesus had come there to lead a revolution against Rome. But Jesus was making the point that his kingdom was not of this world. Nevertheless, we are to be salt and light, and I think the salt really has lost its flavor here in the West, hasn't it? Christians no longer influence the morality or the laws or the foundations of our country. People don't even know what Christianity is about. Mark Ruffalo doesn't know what it's about. I don't know that the Reverend William Barber knows what it's about. This is typically what we see around Christmas time. They say, see, Jesus was born as, Mary was traveling as a refugee, as an illegal immigrant. It's like, no, they were there because they were being taxed by the Romans. I don't know. This Breitbart article refers to a rebuttal from somebody saying that maybe he was referring to Jesus fleeing to Egypt, his family fleeing to Egypt as they were being sought. And said, well, that doesn't even qualify as being an illegal immigrant because Egypt was a part of the Roman Empire. And this article from Breitbart quotes a Christian blog, Pulpit and Pen, saying this is be kind of like Jesus fleeing from Ohio to Indiana. There weren't any sovereign boundaries that were crossed. They're just trying to escape persecution. But Mark Ruffalo has a long history of this. Like I said, it's usually at Christmas time they start talking about Jesus being an illegal immigrant, not knowing anything about what was going on. But in January, Ruffalo was talking about how as things get ugly and rhetorical, let's not forget that we are a country of illegal immigrants. The only real Americans are the indigenous people of America. Like, no, they weren't Americans. They were Iroquois, or they were Apache, or they were Comanche, or whatever. They had their own nations. Mark, we built a nation here in America. The people who built this nation, America, were called Americans. They built it on certain principles. They built it on Christian principles of law. They built it on a view of individual liberty, but they also built it on a rule of law. And as we see the Supreme Court today looking as to whether or not we can even ask if people that are here, foreign citizens criminally trespassing, many of them fully entitled, we pretend, to a welfare state for which there is no constitutional authority. But we pretend that people who are foreign citizens can come here, can get free education, can get in-state college tuition, they can get food, room, board, everything, you name it. And we're lectured by people. Did he write this when he was the Hulk? Me think all people, foreign, illegal immigrants. We talked yesterday about the fact that Obama, Hillary, other Democrat elected officials like Adam Schiff, many of them, talked about Easter worshipers being attacked. They couldn't say it was Christians, and they would not say that it was Islam. And you know, that even extends to the Pope himself. Pope Francis will not, cannot admit that anything like radical Islam exists. He denies the existence of Islamic terrorism. Kind of like McMaster. When they forced out General Flynn, they put McMaster in, and immediately he said, we're not going to have any talk of jihadist terrorists. We're not going to have any talk of radical Islam. Those terms are banned. Well, they're banned out of the Vatican as well. But we did have one Vatican cardinal who talked about barbaric Islamist violence being behind the Sri Lankan attacks. Interestingly enough, this is an African cardinal, and Robert Serra. They know what this looks like, because this is something that, even though the mainstream media ignores it, I've talked about it many times. The people, the Christians in Nigeria, are under severe attack, and not just in Nigeria, throughout Africa. Muslims have been attacking Christians, and so he's not hesitating to call it what it is. But we see that just as Ilhan Omar had said about 9/11, well, some people did some things. And again, I want full disclosure. I know that Saudi Arabia was involved in that, but I also know it was an inside job. They are our partners, just like we partner with the British intelligence to overthrow our election. You know, we also partnered with Saudi intelligence to overthrow our Constitution on 9/11. And even though it's a partnership there, they still bear responsibility. And there are many people who wanted that to happen in Islam. But we have people who've gone back and taken a look at Ilhan Omar's tweets back in 2017, before she got elected. She was still talking about Black Hawk Down, for example. You know, some people did some things. And you had one individual, at the time, it was Al Franken, saying, devastating news, a terrorist attack in Somalia has now claimed the lives of at least 230. Worst attack in the country's history. To which somebody replied, said the worst terrorist attack in Somalia history was the Battle of Mogadishu. 19 U.S. Armed Forces dead, 73 wounded. She came back and replied to that and said, well, in his selective memory, he forgets to also mention the thousands of Somalis killed by American forces that day. So she says Somalis. In her selective memory, she forgot to point out that the Somalis that were killed were terrorists. She identifies with. That's her selective memory. There is an individual whose memory is not quite so selective, and he's spoken about this, and of course that is Chief Warrant Officer Mike Durant. He was shot down in the Black Hawk helicopter over Mogadishu, October 3rd, 1993. He was held captive by the militia loyal to a Somali warlord, Farah Aidid. The U.S. troops were there as part of a mission to help pass out food to Somalis. And again, I think when you look at this whole situation, you look at how ungrateful Ilhan Omar is, heaping scorn on America, saying, yeah, we went to a refugee camp and they handed us food. We came here to America and it wasn't any better. They were still handing us food, and my father said it would be better when we got here to America, but they're still treating us like we're in a refugee camp. And as I've said before, Ilhan, it's your daddy's responsibility to feed you, not the American people. And you show your ingratitude. Every time you open your mouth, you show your hatred of America and your ingratitude for any help. And that's one of the reasons why we shouldn't go to these foreign countries, It's one of the reasons why we shouldn't be involved in regime change or trying to defend one regime or the other, or even handing them out food. Let them take care of themselves. Let them take care of themselves. They don't appreciate anything we do anyway. Ilhan Omar is Exhibit A in how the third world hates us even more when we try to help them. But anyway, the Black Hawk helicopter was shot down. He said the losses that were taken on the Somali side came as a result of their attempts to ambush our ground convoy and the flight of our aircraft. He said our forces were vastly outnumbered. They fought to save their own lives. All the Somali militia had to do was to walk away. But they persisted, said Durant. Again, his Black Hawk helicopter was shot down with an RPG. Delta Force snipers Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon were killed when they joined him trying to keep the Somali militia at bay. But those are the people that Ilhan Omar sees as the victims. She sees the Somali militia that killed those Delta Force soldiers and then drugged their bodies through the streets. They were the victims. They were the victims, according to our Congressman Ilhan Omar. Congresswoman because she has been elected by a bunch of Somali migrants that we foolishly brought into our midst as a fifth column in this country. The mob dragged their bodies throughout the streets of Mogadishu. Durant was captured. He was held by Aidid's militia for 11 days. He said relief organizations from the U.S. and our international partners went to Somalia to try to end the widespread suffering and death from starvation of hundreds of thousands of Somali people. Yeah, and they don't appreciate it at all. Even somebody like Ilhan, who is now in a position of privilege and wealth as a congresswoman, despises us even now. Despises us, despises our system. Even the Daily Beast is asking if the Sri Lanka Easter massacre is a bid to revive a global holy war. Well, you think? What a revelation this is for the Daily Beast. It's kind of like Bob Woodward's revelation that he had. He just had an epiphany. He suddenly realized that this whole Russiagate was fraudulent. He suddenly realized that it's people in the CIA and they need to be looked at because they passed this, they created this phony dossier. He's not willing to say that the dossier was funded by Hillary Clinton yet. But he's willing to say they shopped this dossier around. They used foreign intelligence. The CIA did that. So, yeah, we need to look into this, he says. Yeah, that ace investigator reporter now, after years of nonsense, says, well, we ought to investigate this. Just trying to distance himself from it. But as the Daily Beast says, it's really they quote an NYPD counterterrorism officer who was parked outside a Catholic church on Manhattan's Upper East Side on Sunday, saying it's really a shame that it's come to this, that we have to have police officers guarding our churches from people like Ilhan Omar. That's what it's come to. We tried to help them, and they hate us. It is a holy war against crusaders, Jews, infidels, and apostates. This is actually the Daily Beast writing this. Yeah, these are the people, as I said yesterday, they call themselves martyrs. No, again, they try to piggyback on Judaism and Christianity, and then they pervert it. A martyr was Greek for a witness. These are people who were killed by the Roman Empire because they refused to deny what they had witnessed about Jesus Christ and his resurrection. They would die first. The Muslim martyrs are people who will kill you because you don't agree with them, because you won't follow them, because you are a crusader or a Jew or an unbeliever, or maybe you were a Muslim and now you've converted to another religion. You will be killed as well. The French news agency reported that the Sri Lankan police chief had issued an intelligence alert to officers 10 days earlier. But they didn't warn the Christian churches. That's why we're here. We're going to warn you, Christian churches, what is coming, because your government isn't going to protect you. We'll be right back. Yeah, what is behind this? Is this really just an Easter worship attack? Or is this a global holy war being conducted by Islam against everybody else, but especially against Christians. Again, the French news agency reported that Sri Lankan police chief had issued an intelligence alert 10 days earlier. And it isn't like they hadn't seen this organization, the NTJ, as an Islamic organization, they said was creating a suicide attack, that they were plotting to do that against prominent churches there. They've also been accused of vandalizing Buddhist statues last year, but they hadn't carried out any terrorist acts prior to this. And they said nothing as sophisticated as coordinating bombings on Sunday. That's not sophisticated, folks. It's barbaric. It doesn't take any sophistication to strap a bomb on yourself and walk into a crowd of people and blow yourself up. That's not sophistication. Just barbarism from a barbaric religion. It's the only way that these people have in their religion of being assured that they're going to be rewarded in the afterlife. And their imagination of what the reward is going to be is an eternity of debauchery. That's Islam. Today's bombing, writes one individual, Katz, says, albeit far more deadly, also mirrors the January 2019 bombings that targeted a Catholic church in the Philippines, which ISIS formally claimed. She suggested that the ISIS channels are posting rampantly about Sri Lanka, paving the way for the organization to claim responsibility. She said, while the Easter Sunday slaughter may be framed as revenge for the New Zealand atrocity, it most likely was planned long before. You think? You really think? Of course it was. Because there is much more that's going on besides just those two attacks. I've reported many times that in Nigeria, there is a jihad against Christians that has resulted in 6,000 people killed in just the beginning of this year. And they're still being killed on almost a daily basis. If you look at some of the accounts, just in March 4th, 23 people killed. March 11th, burning more than 100 homes, killing 52 people. March 18th, sieging a siege of a Christian majority town of about 370,000 people. These are organizations, the Fulani as well as Boko Haram. You've heard of that before. They've gone in and kidnapped entire student bodies of young female students because what is haram, what is forbidden, is for females to study. Yeah, you're not to get an education if you're female, not under Sharia law. That is haram. And Boko Haram is about taking those girls so they can't get an education. It's also maybe about fulfilling their idea of heaven on earth. They can grab a bunch of young virgins and take them away. That is Islam there. That's Boko Haram. And as I point out, nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to care. It's not reported by mainstream media. They pretend not to notice. Well, on the one hand, we got the mosque attack in New Zealand, and then we've got this attack in Sri Lanka. So they kind of balance out, right? No, they don't. No, they don't. It's persecution in Nigeria of defenseless Christians in the mostly Muslim north part of the country that is governed under Sharia law. That's what life under Islam looks like. Just take a look at our Saudi allies. Even when we go over there and discover oil, we build the machines that use the oil. We discover the oil. We extract the oil. We refine the oil. We give them the money. And what do they give us? Prohibitions. Don't bring a Bible into Saudi Arabia. And then look at the way they treat their women. Nigerian bishop said Fulani tribesmen armed to the teeth are murdering pregnant women and children and destroying our small holdings. We cannot wait for a mass genocide to happen before intervening. They've also added Christians in Nigeria are treated as second-class citizens in the northern Islamic states that are under Sharia law. Of course, that's by definition. The Christians I met during my recent trip to Nigeria, added one individual, who have suffered from both the Fulani and Boko Haram, are hoping that others around the world are concerned about and praying for them. That is probably the best we can do here in America, because our leadership doesn't care. They don't care enough to offer asylum to a woman in Pakistan who was put on death row because she had the audacity to drink out of the same well that the Muslim women were drinking out of. They accused her of blasphemy because she was a Christian drinking out of a well, same water that the Muslims are drinking out of, because they treat you as a subhuman if you are not their brand of Islam. I mean, Islam is at war with itself as well. We frequently forget that the Sunnis and the Shias and the Wahhabis, all these different branches of Islam, hate each other as much as they hate us. They're at war with everyone and each other. But churches have become the number one target for hate attacks, an average of 105 every single month, as Michael Schneider, end of the American Dream blog, points out. It's the Open Doors USA put together the figures. An average of 105 churches or Christian buildings are burned or attacked every month, more than 3 per day. In addition, an average of 345 Christians are killed for faith-related reasons every month. Every month. But the Washington Post claims that the massacre of Sri Lankan Christians, quote, stoked far-right anger in the West. How about that? Yeah, we're not even supposed to be angry about this. If we say anything about it, as I did, I was attacked on Twitter for being Islamophobic. No, I'm not afraid of Islam. I wouldn't say the things that I do if I was afraid of Islam. I'm not afraid of Islam. But I am angry about this. I'm very angry about this. And so the Washington Post says, well, you don't have a right to this. You know, that we've had far right anger about this. I have to wonder about the far left apathy. I have to worry about the mainstream apathy. I have to worry about the apathy. I wonder about the apathy of the Washington Post, for example. They say, although Christian minorities are targeted around the world, analysts say that the vast majority of terrorism victims globally are Muslims. That's the Washington Post talking. So it's the Muslims that are hurting the worst. They're hit the hardest. No, that's not true. As mrctv.org points out, a recent Pew Research Center analysis determined that it is Christians, Washington Post, not Muslims, that are the single most persecuted religious group in the world. And you better arm yourselves in your churches. Make sure somebody there is set up to protect you from somebody who's going to come in and attack. Of course, you can't protect yourself from suicide bombers. We're just looking at the amazing reactions from the left and the non-reactions from the Democrat politicians. As Ryan Saavedra pointed out, not a single Democrat presidential candidate on the town hall at CNN said a single word about the hundreds of Christians murdered by Islamic terrorists on Easter in Sri Lanka. And I tweeted out a meme that someone put together from Hillary Clinton. Just take a look at what she had to say after the terror attack in New Zealand. And imagine if she had said the similar thing about the terror attacks in Sri Lanka that have killed 6 times as many people, and another 300 instead of 50, and 500 people severely injured, and maybe more fatalities there. She said about the New Zealand situation, she said, my heart breaks for New Zealand and the global Muslim community. We must continue to fight the perpetuation and normalization of Islamophobia and racism in all of its forms. White supremacist terrorists must be condemned by leaders everywhere. Their murderous hatred must be stopped, said Hillary Clinton. Now, what if she had said essentially the same thing? Would she have the same concern about Christians? I mean, if we just strike out the different things that are specific to New Zealand and substitute Sri Lanka, take out the statements about the hatred towards Muslims and put that in there towards Christians? No, she would never will never say anything like that. Here's what it would sound like. Can you imagine Hillary Clinton saying, my heart breaks for Sri Lanka and the global Christian community. We must continue to fight the perpetuation and normalization of Christianophobia and racism in all of its forms. Muslim terrorists must be condemned by leaders everywhere. Their murderous hatred must be stopped. She would never say that. Never say that. And as we were speaking during the break, Travis, say what you had to say in terms of the, actually it's not even true what the Washington Post had said. But if it were true, that the Washington Post said that there are more Muslims that are victims of terrorism than Christians, that is not true. It's actually the other way around, according to Pew Research Center. But, of course, that's a statement made by the Washington Post. But if that were true, what might be the possible explanation for that, Travis?
I would bet my entire year's salary that almost all, if not all, of these terrorist attacks by other Muslims against Muslims were perpetuated by other Muslims.
Yeah.
Just continually. There's
right.
one group of people that does suicide bombings on a regular basis.
As I said before, if you look at the Sunnis, the Shias, the Wahhabis, and those are just three of the biggest ones, they hate each other as much as they hate other religions, as much as they hate Buddhists or Hindus or Jews or Christians. They hate each other as well. And so, yeah, I do believe that there's a lot of Muslim-on-Muslim violence as well. You're absolutely right. DHS, meanwhile, is no better than Hillary Clinton or the Democrats. The DHS says the suicide bomb attacks hit, quote, places of worship. Can't say it's churches. We can't say that it was Islamic terrorists who attacked Christians. We can't say that it was churches. They were places of worship. They were places of Easter worshipers. That's exactly what it was, according to Homeland Security. They can't say the religion of the victims. They refuse to say the religion of the killers, even though it was their religion that was the motivation. It was their religion that was the basis of hate. Can't say that. Cannot say that. I even had somebody reply to my tweet where I put out Hillary Clinton and what I said about Easter worshipers. I had some person come back and say, oh, Christianophobia? Oh, that's rich. Maybe if the hypocrites you follow so blindly would quit bastardizing your faith for their own financial gain. You want to give me an example of that? I can give you an example of a hypocrite in Buttigieg. Buttigieg, who's out there, as I've said many times, with his own religion masquerading as Christianity, with a big log in his own eye, talking about other people, saying, look, we're all sinners. That's real Christianity. This person who doesn't put their name up there probably has 3 followers if they've got that many. But yeah, real Christianity recognizes that we're all sinners. But if you're going to try to rewrite Christianity, as Buttigieg is trying to do, if you're going to use your own self-righteousness to criticize other people, then yes, we have a right to call you out on hypocrisy. Franklin Graham just did that. And he's being attacked all over the media for that. That, oh, well, you said that you called out Buttigieg, saying that he's a hypocrite. Well, you're following a hypocrite because we know that Trump has committed adultery and so forth. Look, everybody has committed sin. That's what Christianity is about. But if you want to go out there and you want to be the self-righteous identifier of other people, then maybe you ought to look at that list of sins. Right next to adultery is homosexuality. That's in my Bible, but maybe you haven't looked at the Bible yet. Violence against Christians is underreported, says the New American, and it is. Won't even be mentioned by Homeland Security or by Hillary Clinton or by these people of this ilk. Political commentator David Horowitz said the Easter massacre of Christians by radical Muslim jihadists in Sri Lanka is just the bloody tip of a genocidal crusade which has taken the lives of hundreds of thousands of Christians since the turn of the century. The oldest Christian community in the world, in Iraq, has been completely wiped out by Islamicists. The Christians that were there were either massacred or the survivors felt it best to leave the country. As Horowitz said, the Christian temple in Mosul had featured Sunday sermons continuously since the time of St. Paul, but it is now silent. And of course, the persecution of Christians in America pales in comparison to the violence that is already being conducted on a massive scale in places like Nigeria and elsewhere. But as we look at what is happening, in America. The fact that if you are openly Christian, the Democrats now say that that is a disqualification for being a judge. Your Christian beliefs disqualify you. If you support life, if you do not support abortion on demand, if you do not support abortion of full-term babies, if you do not support infanticide after birth, then you are disqualified because you're a Christian. And we got Buttigieg out there trying to redefine Christianity. And he's doing this. And here's the key point here, folks. Buttigieg is doing this because he knows that it's going to work out to his advantage. Do you think that somebody could call all Christians who obey the Bible, who look to the Bible for definition of sin, not that they're sinless, but look at it and call sin sin if the Bible says it's sin? Do you think that Christians who follow the Bible could be attacked by a politician 10 years ago, 5 years ago? And yet that has been the source of his popularity. That tells you where we're headed in this country. When somebody can ride the hatred and bigotry directed towards biblical Christianity, where they can ride that to the top of the polls, that tells you that we are on the cusp of a wave of Christian persecution in this country, because there is a lot of hatred and bigotry that he is tapping into for his presidential run. You know, we look at this Sri Lankan situation. As I said, I was called Islamophobic because I said, well, suicide bombers, I only know of one religion that does that. Christians don't do that. Jews don't do that. Buddhists don't do that. Hindus don't do that. Only Islam, the only religion that even imagines such a thing. But if you say that it's Muslims, suicide bombers carrying this stuff out, you know, as people look at the Islamic jihadi imam, I said, well, he's been accused by some people as masterminding it. Some people have identified him as one of the suicide bombers. But if you put that up, you'll have Muslims and Democrats call you out as Islamophobic. No, it's the definition of Islam. I'll tell you how bad things are. It's not just the Democrats. It's not just the Washington Post and the Department of Homeland Security that can't say that churches were attacked, that Christians were attacked by Muslims. No, it was terrorists who attacked Easter worshipers in some places of worship. You know, some people did some things. That's what we're hearing from everybody now. Everybody is channeling Ilhan. And it is an ill wind that is blowing towards our way because, as I said in the last segment, if somebody can build a presidential campaign on bigotry and hatred against Christians, we're in big trouble. It's brewing, folks. It's brewing. You know, when we stop becoming salt and light, then as God said, we're good for nothing but to be trampled on. And guess who's going to be doing the trampling? It's going to be the LGBT and the Muslims who are going to be doing the trampling of the Christians who are no longer salt and light in this country. Here's an example. Pope Francis calls for universal condemnation of the Sri Lanka terrorists, but he can't say that they're Islamic terrorists. He did say, I would hope that all will condemn these inhuman terrorist acts, which are never justifiable. But as he has said many times before, he will not call it Islamic terrorism. He denies the very existence of Islamic terrorism. But while he keeps silent about the cause of this, one cardinal in the Vatican doesn't. Cardinal Robert Serra denounced the barbaric Islamic violence behind the bombings in Sri Lanka. He said, as we celebrate the resurrection of the Son of God, the terrible attacks in Sri Lanka once again show how the followers of Christ are, all over the world, victims of wild and foolish deeds. He says, I condemn this barbaric Islamic violence. Pray. Yes, we better hope that there are more people who will stand up and say what this is really about. And again, he is coming from an area of the world where he has seen what this does, and he's boldly speaks out where the Pope will not. Because the Pope is pushing the open border agenda, whose purpose is to create a clash of civilizations, a clash of religions, so that they can eviscerate the West. The West is what stands in the way of the technocratic global elite that want to have a one-world government. They can't get that without collapsing Western Europe and the United States. And the tool of collapse is going to be the clash of civilizations, of religions, and the welfare states that will be overburdened by the rest of the world flooding into these generous welfare states that they've created. That's what's happening at our border. I've got an update on Julian Assange here I want to get to in just a moment. But folks, remember InfoWarsStore.com. Remember that you are our sponsor. We depend on your purchases. That's how we fund this operation. Yes, support the sponsors that we have on radio and television. Tell them why you are supporting them. That keeps us going on those particular radio and TV stations, and we certainly do support that and appreciate that. They carry us, but also remember that this is free to air for them. And we get all of our revenue from the products that we sell directly because, Google's going to shut down any ads that we put up. We can't even put up vitamin ads places. They will shut that down. Yeah, they're manipulating the elections, but pretend that it's just a couple of ads that were taken out, as Mueller is saying, by the Soviet intelligence forces. That disappeared back in 1989. Yeah, that's what really affected the election. No, it didn't. It wasn't. Even if it was a Russian government agent, it's not as effective as Google shutting down all independent, conservative, and anti-war media. But if you want to support us, you can go to InfoWarsStore.com. We got a lot of specials. We have continued our annual shirt sale. Actually, it's an apparel sale. It's not just shirts, but it's also hats and hoodies as well as T-shirts. And we have new designs as well as classic designs. They're all 50% off at InfoWarsStore.com. We also have 50% off a combo pack of Super Male Vitality and Alpha Power. And you can get Brain Force Plus for 25% off along with a free knockout. That is our all-natural sleep aid. So get Brain Force Plus at 25% off and get a free bottle of knockout. You can try that if you've never tried it before. It's all natural, very effective, and so is Brain Force Plus, very effective for focusing your concentration. Okay, let's take a look at what's going on with Julian Assange. It's been 11 days now that he's been in prison. And as people have said, it's outrageous, inhumane, and possibly illegal. He's being held in a prison called Belmarsh. And many people have referred to this maximum security prison in the UK as the UK's version of Guantanamo Bay. He's being held without any visitors in detention. He is not allowed to see his doctors or his lawyers now over these last 11 days. Doctors who had visited Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy have said that he urgently needs medical care, but they're not giving that to him. He's not allowed to see his lawyers. He's not allowed to see doctors. And he's being held in confinement. Caitlin Johnstone points out on Zero Hedge, said, if you listen to the less informed chatter of the overt propagandists on mainstream media or the brainwashed rank-and-file consumers of mass media in the West, you will realize that most people think that this has something to do with Russia and with rape allegations as well. Quite frankly, when you look at the Mueller investigation, the way the Attorney General Barr was talking about it, he completely dismissed any Russian collusion with President Trump or anybody in his administration. But if you remember, he continued to hold out the nonsense of Russian collusion with Julian Assange. That tells you something right there, I think. There's a shameful commentary on our government. And of course, yesterday I played for you Pompeo on April the 15th, bragging about the fact that at West Point, while they were told that the motto there for the cadets was, we don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't steal, and we don't tolerate those who do. He said, but then I became director of the CIA, and we lied, we cheated, and we stole. And the crowd applauded and laughed. That is what we've become here in America. Isn't that sad? Like I said, the Christian foundations of this country have been erased. We're unable even to defend those basic principles here in America. People like Pompeo, who say that they're Christians, who brag about that. Well, you know, if maybe he is a Christian. I'm not going to judge the guy. All I can say is that if he is a Christian, it does not inform anything about the way he's living his life. If he's a Christian, he's going to brag about lying, cheating, and stealing. He could also brag about the fact that at the CIA, they assassinate and torture. How's that for a resume for a Christian? Tells you that we are post-Christian. But getting back to Julian Assange, most of the people who consume mainstream media believe that this has something to do with Russia and the rape allegations. It doesn't. None of those things are true. You know what this is really about? This is about the military-industrial complex coming after somebody who exposes their crimes, somebody who exposes their war crimes, somebody who exposes their plots to overthrow other governments. That's what's really going on. And she said they're not going to all this trouble, said Caitlin Johnstone, for a bail violation and a 5-year maximum sentence of conspiracy to get information. That would have been 5 years. He's been in confinement there in the Ecuadorian embassy for nearly 7 years. If he was found guilty of what they charged him on, he would get 5 years in prison. And they had to trump it up and say, well, that was a conspiracy to try to get information in conjunction with a terrorist attempt with a computer somehow to get past the statute of limitations. The statute of limitations would have been expired if they hadn't tried to make that into terrorism. You know who the real terrorists are, said Jimmy Carter? He said the U.S. has become the most warlike nation in the history of the world. And as I point out, President Trump he had a conversation with President Trump. President Trump said he's worried about China. We should be worried about China. But Jimmy Carter pointed out to President Trump what I've pointed out on this show many times. So why is the United States going around militarily overthrowing regimes when China is getting what it wants out of people with a Belt and Road Initiative? They're building infrastructure while we're blowing infrastructure up in foreign countries. And we're letting our infrastructure decay here in America. And they may be authoritarian, and they may be communist, and they may be very dangerous, and they are all of those things. But they understand better than we do the power of a carrot and not a stick. That's it for the show. Thanks for joining.